Welcome in everyone to another edition of Bayou Bengal Bites. Chet is on a work trip, so it's just me this week. We will have a full rundown. First, we'll get into the Alabama recap what went wrong and right, and then we'll get into some key takeaways from the Tigers' 42-28 loss to the Crimson Tide, and then we'll start to turn the picture towards LSU and Florida and Saturday night, and then we'll have some game predictions, and then we'll round out the show with around town news. So let's get right into the Alabama recap. The Tigers fell 42-28 on the road in Tuscaloosa against Alabama, pretty much knocking them out of the SEC race with Ole Miss and Alabama being ahead of them. It's looking like Alabama will be the SEC West winner in 2023 with the win, especially since they're still undefeated in SEC West play and they have everything ahead of them in the college football playoff race. For LSU's sake, now with a third loss, and the three losses, they have all been pretty similar. You gave up 42 to Alabama, you gave up 45 to Florida State, and then you also give up over 50 points. So it's been the defense that's been faltering in the losses. So let's go ahead and recap this game. The game got off to a great start. Alabama did get the ball first. Your defense got to stop. Harold Perkins got the sack to give you your high-powered offense the ball. And then Jane Daniels and company was able to strike first. Jane Daniels hit Malik Neighbors for a long touchdown pass, a 46-yard touchdown pass to get the Tigers on the board to get the scoring going. The LSU fans are feeling confident after that 7-0 loss. After that 7-0 lead, your fans were able to get into the game, but after that, this is when the defense really had their troubles. Jalen Milroe, he had a legacy game. Milroe ended the game with 4 touchdowns. That all came on the ground. After that, you saw pretty much Alabama really take full control of this game, at least until the first quarter. You got 2 back-to-back Jalen Milroe touchdown runs. Your first one was a 23-yard touchdown run to put the score at 7-7. And then after that, a few minutes later, before you go into the second quarter, Jalen Milroe finds the end zone on a second time, this time on a 4-yard rushing score to put the Tide up 14-7 heading into the first quarter. And then in the second quarter, LSU was able to really even up the score. Jane Daniels had himself a 9-yard touchdown run that put up the score 14-14. And then, this is whenever it went back and forth. Jalen Milroe, once again, before the end of the second quarter, he had a 21-yard touchdown run to put Alabama up 21-14. And then you were able to get double your score. LSU deferred to the second half. They kicked the ball off. It worked out pretty well as Kyron Lacey got a 26-yard touchdown pass. Jane Daniels was phenomenal in this 2-minute drill. Only a minute left on the clock, and the LSU Tigers were able to go into the half tied up at 21-21. Feeling good going into the half, especially the way that your defense has been playing. And then this is where it really unraveled in the third quarter. You were able to get the lead with a Josh Williams 2-yard run, reminiscent of that Clyde Edwards-Helaire run in 2019. You went up 28-21. And then after that, you didn't see the lead again as Roydell Williams went off for the 16-yard run to put the Tide and the Tigers tied again. And then after that, the wheels really fell off for this LSU team. You had another Jalen Milroe touchdown run. This one was an 11-yard touchdown run to put Alabama up 35-28. And then, Jace McClellan was able to get a 10-yard run. This was after the Jaden Daniels interception. So really put this one out of bed here, 42-28. And really a key note there, you saw Jaden Daniels get out of the game. We saw Garrett Nussmeier. Nussmeier came into the game. He had that one good drive, and then they had that drop that on fourth down that really faltered that drive. So it was a tough situation for Garrett Nussmeier to come in. I mean, he had his throws for sure, but he also had his missed throws. But let's go ahead and get into this Alabama recap. We went it through the scoring cap. Your passing leaders for LSU, Jane Daniels, he was 15 for 24. 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Also, he was also leading rusher, 11 carries, 163 yards, and a touchdown for Mr. Daniels. And then the leading receiver for the Tigers was Malik Neighbors. He had a fantastic game. He was open pretty much all game, 10 receptions, 171 yards, and a touchdown. Brian Thomas, he was also involved in the game. He had a couple of receptions for 30 yards. You saw Kyron Lacey. He got that touchdown. Mason Taylor, he had a couple of grabs. So really everyone was involved in this offense. And then your running backs, you pretty much saw the 4 running backs you saw all season so far. Caleb Jackson, he was your main kickoff returner, but we saw him come into the game mainly as a blocking running back. And then you saw Josh Williams. He scored the touchdown. And then also Logan Diggs, he was in the mix too. So, LSU's offense, one of the best in the country. They put up 28 points. This was definitely one of their big tests. They got 478 total yards of offense, 272 in passing, 206 on the rushing. But the main story in this one, your defense continues to let your offense down. It feels like this defense is wasting the talent of Jane Daniels. The third loss, you'll probably be heading to a Florida Bowl, where that's the ReliaQuest Bowl. Probably won't be the Citrus Bowl because LSU has played there many times. If you remember, they played in Florida State. They played them in Orlando to start the season. Then in last year's bowl game, you faced off against Purdue in the Citrus Bowl. So I don't think that you're probably going to go to the Citrus Bowl. You're probably either going to go to either the ReliaQuest Bowl, the Texas Bowl, one of those, middle of the road bowls. That's probably not, what LSU wants to do, especially after winning the SEC West in Brian Kelly's first year. Right now, you're sitting at 6-3. After the Alabama loss, still have games to play. You got Florida at home, you got Georgia State at home, and then you also have Texas A&M at home. So we will see if LSU can finish out this season 9-3, and then get to a bowl game to finish off at 10-3 to not kind of build some momentum. I know this wasn't the season that we all had in mind. They were ranked number 5 heading into the season. You lost to Florida State early on in the season, and that Ole Miss loss was pretty much the start of the unravel. And then this loss to Alabama really, just kicks you out not only of the college football playoff race. So the college football playoff honestly was a slim chance anyways. Even with the win, you still had to go on and beat Georgia, and you also beat Florida and Texas A&M along the way. So I just don't think it was going to happen even with this win. But even with the loss, this was definitely detrimental. So on the defense, like I mentioned in last week's show, we talked about this with the key injuries. We're out your star, your top 3 cornerbacks. Zy Alexander is looking like he's going to be out for the majority of the rest of maybe even of the rest of the season. You also had Denver Harris. He's been ineligible for the past couple of weeks. And then Deuce Chestnut, we haven't really seen him since that season opener in game against Florida State. So we're able to get some freshmen. Javen Toviano, he definitely had a great game. Sage Ryan, he was one of your top cornerbacks, but he struggled throughout the game too. And then your linebacker crew, Omar Spates was in there in the middle. Didn't really see Wes Weeks at all, which I was really surprised. There wasn't really any second half adjustments of this defense. They really stayed with the same personnel. Harold Perkins, he had a quiet game. I know that he had that sack on the first drive, but outside of that, we didn't really see his name called on Saturday night. And then the defensive line was pretty much non-existent. Mason Smith really hasn't been involved this whole entire season. I think that a lot of people are going to call him the biggest bust to ever come through the program. We will see how that pans out, but he's definitely not been up to his form. Mekhi Wingo being out, that was definitely huge. He was definitely one of your leading guys in the defensive, the defensive line. So really nobody stepped up. Jordan Jefferson, he got locked down. But you got to give credit to Alabama's offensive line. Alabama's offensive line, I think that a lot of people talked about them through the nation, that they've been going through their lumps, going through their struggles. But I think that Alabama's offensive line, they played their best brand of football. Alabama's defense, that was definitely the difference. The difference in the game was Alabama's defense was able to get stops. LSU wasn't, especially in crunch time in the second half. Looks like Alabama made all the adjustments. So that's the recap. Let's go ahead and get into the key takeaways of what went right and what went wrong for the Tigers on Saturday night in Tuscaloosa. So let's go ahead and get away with the negative of what went wrong. I definitely think it starts on the defensive side. No adjustments here. I think that a lot of people are going to go after Matt House. We'll see what happens. If he's fired in the next couple of weeks, maybe we'll see, Dave Aranda. His name has been thrown out there, especially with Baylor. He's at 3-6. Jim Leonard, the former, Wisconsin defensive coordinator, maybe he gets a call. We don't see Alex Grinch. Don't even bring up Alex Grinch. I know that he's been fired of USC's defensive coordinator, but we do not want him here. So we will see if Brian Kelly decides to go with another defensive coordinator. Even if he does, I don't think that he does it in these next couple of weeks. But I definitely get it. There's really nothing else to play for, so you might as well just can him while you can. We saw USC can their guy, so they're already a step ahead of what LSU is. So we will see if Matt House is still the defensive coordinator moving forward, but I wouldn't be surprised if he stays on staff at least until the offseason. But defense, like I mentioned, let's go ahead and get to the stats. Alabama, 507 total yards of offense, 219, passing yards, 288 on the ground. The main story, if you look at it for the Alabama offense, was Jalen Milroe having himself a game. He didn't have any passing touchdowns. All of his touchdowns came on the ground. He was the leading rusher for the Tide. He had 20 carries, 165 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So Milroe, you really had no answer. And really the main problem for LSU's defense, they could not get off the field on third down. Alabama converted 11 of 13 third downs. And if you really look at every single loss, go back to the Ole Miss game, LSU's defense could not get off the field. Ole Miss put up 50 points. Same thing in the season opener, especially in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. Florida State's offense was able to move the ball effectively at will, and they were able to stay on the field on third down. So this LSU defense could not get off the field on third down. That was definitely the main issue. It could have been 3rd and 20. It could have been in 3rd and 5. Alabama's going to convert it, and pretty much Alabama on third down, they trusted Jalen Milroe, and LSU didn't really have any answer. There was no quarterback spy. We saw it on the first drive with Harold Perkins whenever he got that sack on third down to force Alabama to punt. But outside of that, there was no pressure from the defensive line. The linebackers, they were shaky all night. I definitely give credit to the cornerbacks. I think that the quarterbacks in the scenario with your top 3 cornerbacks being out, I think that they played well enough. Your top receiver for Alabama was Isaiah Bond. Now, I get it. Bond did have a couple of nice catches that really were big plays. That was 60 yards that Bond had. But man, there was just a lot of big plays, especially on the ground. And you also had that those 2 dump off passes. I believe it was to McClellan that really went off. So, like I mentioned at the start, of last week, you have to limit Alabama to the big plays, and LSU's defense wasn't able to do that, especially on the ground. Alabama killed you through the ground. Alabama's offensive line was able to control this line of scrimmage. And this game, LSU-Alabama game, always comes down to who wins the line of scrimmage, and Alabama, in the end, was able to get that. And like I mentioned, I'll go ahead and shift back to this. It was all about who was able to get the stops. The announcer said it was pretty much like tennis, who's going to break serve, and Alabama was able to break serve in the third quarter. Let's go ahead and go to that key play. After LSU went up 28-21, Josh Williams had that 2-yard touchdown run. Alabama in 4 minutes, just like that, they were tied it up 28-28. LSU gets the ball back. They're driving. They have a third down. Mason Taylor drops it. They have a false start, which, the false start penalties killed you. Whenever you were in 3rd and 5, you get a false start penalty, it gets you back to 3rd down and 10. And against Alabama's defense, you can't do that. So penalties definitely cost you. We'll get into, Charles Turner, the center. He definitely had the yips on Saturday night. Definitely had some costly penalties. Kyron Lacey, he had that one false start that really killed the drive. But man, Mason Taylor's drop, I think that was definitely where the momentum shifted. If he at least caught that ball, he probably gets the first down, maybe even if he gets close to that. But the next play, you get a false start. Even if you get the false start, it was probably, a 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7. But if you remember that next play, it was, I believe it was like a 10-yard pass to Mason Taylor, which was like 4 or 5 yards short of the stick. You had to punt. And then Alabama and Jalen Milroe was able to do what they did all night, run it down right your throat. 11-yard run for Jalen Milroe, and after that, Alabama, the floodgates really happened as they were able to get that interception. Once they got the interception, LSU just was absolutely gassed, and they had no answers. So that was the negatives. There is some positives to take away. This is one of the best LSU offenses that we're ever going to see. The bad thing is it's probably going to be wasted because you already have 3 losses on the schedule. And with the 3 losses, we all know what that means. You're going to have a middle of the line bowl game, which nobody really wants to play. So we'll see if, there's any opt outs. That's definitely possible with the 3 losses. So, Jay Daniels, we'll get into him whenever we get into the Florida game. Daniels played the absolute mind out. I mean, he played like a Heisman candidate. Now, if you're wondering if he's probably still in the Heisman race now, I think that he could definitely get a vote to go to New York City, but he's not going to win. I think it's either going to come down to Michael Penix or Bo Nix at this point. But Daniels, I mean, he did what he needed to do. I mean, the offense definitely lived up to the billing. It was one of the best defenses that they faced and to put up 28 points. I know it wasn't enough as the defense wasn't able to get enough, but I think that LSU's offense, the special teams, they had that one missed field goal by Damian Ramos. I don't think that was really, faulting. That didn't really lead to anything. The missed field goal didn't really lead to like, oh, if you would have made that, you would have won the game. You lost by 14, so it wouldn't have been much of a difference. And then the one punt that you really had all night, it was kind of a shank. It wasn't that good of a punt, and that really set up Alabama a good field position. So those are the key takeaways from the Alabama recap. Let's go ahead now and turn the book to the LSU Florida game, which comes at a very unique time in November. So let's get right into it. All right, let's get into Saturday night in Death Valley, Florida versus LSU. This will be at 6:30 on SEC Network. We learned that on Sunday after the games concluded on Saturday. So it's definitely going to be a fun environment. We don't really get this matchup. Usually we get it in the month of October, but now we get it in November. Arkansas, we saw them back in September come to Death Valley, and now we see November. So LSU will finish out a 3-game homestand: Florida, Georgia State, and Texas A&M. If you're able to win those, you get to 9 wins. You can finish out the season with a little momentum. So let's talk about the Florida Gators. The Gators, ever since they're coming off of the bye week, they lost to Georgia pretty handily. And then, man, a loss that I just didn't see coming against an Arkansas team that was on a 6-game losing streak. There was a lot of talk if Sam Pittman was even going to be the head coach moving forward. But Florida loses that one 39-36 in overtime in Gainesville. They were wearing the All Blacks. I thought that there was no chance that Florida was going to lose this game, but yet Florida finds a way. Their defense struggled all game. They didn't really have any answers. KJ Jefferson, he's been struggling. He's had an up-and-down season, but, man, Florida's defense really had no answers as KJ Jefferson really had a big game. And then Raheem Rocket Sanders, he had a big game as well, over 100 yards rushing. So this was a back-and-forth battle, a high-scoring game that went in overtime. Florida kicked the field goal to go up 36-33 in overtime. But then, KJ Jefferson found Tyron Broden for a 4-yard pass to put that game to bed. So Florida comes in this game 5-4. They're still looking for that one more win to get them to bowl eligibility in the second year of Billy Napier. So let's go into, before we get into the stars on the offense and the defense, there definitely is some key injuries to watch on Florida. They had 3 defensive starters out against Arkansas. We will see if they will be ready to go. But this Florida defense has been up and down. We'll go ahead and get into how they've been shaping out. So the Florida defense ranks 44th in total defense. If you want some comparison, LSU ranks 97th. So, Florida's defense could say that they have the edge in this one. LSU's defense has definitely been reeling in the past couple of weeks. They look good against LSU, against Auburn and Army. But then you go back to your old ways against Alabama. So this will definitely be a game of, maybe again, who can get that stop to really pull away in this one. Passing yards allowed, Florida ranks 45th. They're averaging 209.2 yards a game giving up. And then on the rushing yards allowed, 59, 141.2. So they're middle-of-the-road defense on both passing yards and also rushing yards allowed. And then let's get into whenever the offenses get into the red area, they're one of the worst in the country, 102nd. They've allowed 9 touchdowns pretty much whenever you get into the red zone. That's per game too. So not a great defense. Florida's defense, they've had their good games. The Tennessee game, I think that was one of their best games. They struggled against the Utah offense, and they struggled against Georgia, and they also struggled against Arkansas. So this is a Florida team they definitely had some talent. They have some talent on all three levels of that defense, especially on the defensive line. But this is a defense that's really been real, and in the next couple of weeks, it doesn't get any easier, especially against an LSU offense. So that might be without Jane Daniels. He's on concussion protocol, I would say, at the time of this recording. I don't think that he's going to be playing. We will see. If he's not, it will be Garrett Nussmeier going up against this Florida defense. So you might see a more Logan Diggs type of game, especially the way that Raheem Sanders was able to get after this Florida defense. So we might see, the Logan Diggs and also Josh Williams factor get into this one. On the opposite side of the ball, Florida is led by quarterback Graham Mertz. He's had his good games. He's also had his games where you also question marks. So you don't really know what you're going to get out of Graham Mertz. The running backs are led by Montrell Johnson Jr. and Trevor Etienne. So they definitely have some studs, wide receivers. And then also on the wide receivers, they're led by Ricky Pearsall. And they also have some guys that could definitely beat you one-on-one. So once again, it's pretty much going to be that same matchup. It's not so great of a Florida defense, and it's not so great of an LSU offense. So this could definitely very well go into another high-scoring shootout, which LSU is definitely accustomed to. But before we get into the game predictions, let's go on to see how this Florida offense has been performing this whole entire year. Points per game on offense is 28.9. That ranks 59th. LSU is right up there in the top three, so there definitely is a big gap between both of the offenses. Passing offense, they rank 32nd in the country, 275 passing yards per game. And also the rushing offense, 134.8 rushing yards per game, which ranks them 86. So they're more strength on passing, but like I mentioned, don't get me wrong, Johnson and Etienne. We saw Johnson really have a big game against Florida, against LSU last year in that high-scoring shootout. 2 years ago, we saw a 49-42 game. So I definitely think that this is going to be another game that you got to get into at least the 30s to win this one. So that is what you need to know. Know your foe of the Florida Gators. Should definitely be a fun environment. On a Saturday night in the start of November. Don't really see this one often between these two rivals, but it should be a fun one in Death Valley. So let's get into our game predictions and see if we have the Gators or the Tigers taking this one home. Let's see who's going to win this one. Right now, Vegas has LSU as a 13.5 point favorite. We will see if that line moves. I think that if Garrett Nussmeier is named the starting quarterback, that's definitely going to move down to the 10, the 9 mark. So definitely, if you're a betting man, maybe wait to see if Garrett Nussmeier is starting or if Jane Daniels plays. I would definitely feel confident in LSU covering that 14. But this is a rivalry game. This rivalry game is one of the best in the SEC. LSU has been able to control this one for the past couple of seasons. So like I mentioned, if we see Garrett Nussmeier, we will see if Nussmeier is going to sling it. That's what he's going to do. He was able to do that last year. We saw him in the SEC Championship against Georgia. We saw them this past Saturday against Alabama, but it was definitely a tough environment. So we will see if we see Garrett Nussmeier get the start. It's definitely looking more and more likely, especially with Jane Daniels on concussion protocol. Usually that takes about a week, but we will see if we see anything crazy. So we might see more of the LSU rushing game in this one. Logan Diggs might get more involved than he usually does. So I think that this is going to be another high-scoring game. The way that both defenses have been playing doesn't really give me too much confidence, but I am going to go with LSU. I think that they get the bounce back. They are coming off of a physical game, so I don't think that it's going to be a pretty as a start, but I think that LSU gets the win here. Give me 35-31. I think it's a very close game coming down to the wire, so I definitely take Florida to cover that 13.5 right now. But give me LSU to win this one 35-31 in another game that gets to the 30s. Couldn't maybe be even higher. If Jane Daniels plays in this one, I could definitely see this one get into like a 45-35 game that we've seen in the years past. So I think that the best bet is here. Take the points in this one for the Gators, but I think that LSU gets the win here on Saturday night in front of the home crowd to get back on track and get that 7th win on this season. So before we close out Bayou Bengal Bites, let's get into some around town news. Quick around town news. We have both of our, the women's basketball team and also the men's basketball team will be in action by the time this recording is out. They will hopefully be both 1-0 and 1-0 LSU travels to Las Vegas on Monday to face off against Colorado. They're going to be starting their reign of national champions. If you watch their two exhibition games, there's a lot to like about that LSU team. They have some depth. Haley Van Lith is looking good. Flau'jae Johnson is starting to look hot. And then Angel Reese and Nisha Morrow. That is going to be an absolute nasty starting five. And he also has some firepower off the bench. On the men's side, they get after it also on Monday night. Like I mentioned, these games will both be done, but they get on Monday night against Mississippi Valley State in the PMAC. So basketball season is upon us. Definitely going to be excited to watch both of the men's and women's team. We'll see if the men's team can get back on track. They were 2-16 in the SEC last year. They with Jalen Cook, there's some NCAA controversy with him, but you were able to get the transfer portal too. So definitely excited to see both of the LSU men's and women's basketball team get after it. Should be a great season for both teams. So that is going to be it for Bayou and Bingo Bites. It was a full show recapping Alabama, looking ahead to Florida, and also looking ahead to both of the basketball teams getting started. So we will be back here next week. Enjoy your weekend. We'll leave you with a Go Tigers.